Now the body of the fish is basically a kind of angled box that fits around this interior box that we already have. You'll find all of the pieces that we need for this section listed under medium weight chipboard. Everything is medium weight chipboard, and it's in the section labeled body here. Now I have those pieces laid out here in front of me. Now these 16 pieces that are called supports or end, we need to do a little sub-cutting on them, and this is what the shape will look like. We start out by, at the top, these are all pieces are 5 inches by 1 inch, and we'll start at the top by measuring 3/4 of an inch down on the outside, and I'm just using a mark on my craft mat to do that. So I've measured down 3/4 of an inch, and then on the bottom I'm going to measure up 3/4 of an inch. And then on the top, we don't need any more tick marks, but on the bottom we'll make a tick mark at 1/2 an inch or halfway in between. And then you can just use your knife, your ruler and your knife, and cut this. I'm just going to draw these so that you can see what gets cut out. We're going to cut out this bottom corner down here, and then we'll connect this top corner here to the tick mark we made, and remove this part there. So 2 kind of triangles get removed from each of these 16 pieces. So I'll do that, and then I'll be back. Now I found it easier to just use my big scissors to kind of connect my dots and cut these triangles off, but use your craft knife or your scissors, whatever works best for you. Now we want to glue these up in sets of 2, so just match them up and make 8 sets of 2. So now we have our 8 support pieces, and for 5 of them we're going to do something a little special. So one thing to keep in mind is that the side that has, or the end that has the 1/2 inch flat is the bottom, and the end that just comes up to a point is the top. So make sure you're always have them oriented in that direction. So we'll take 2 of these, and we will measure down 3/4 of an inch from the top, and you can just use your craft mat or a ruler and just make a little mark right there on the side. So do that from the top, which is the pointy end, 3/4 of an inch down from the top. And then take your crocodile on the bigger side and put that so that you're cutting a notch. So that's what it looks like here. Let me put one of these pieces of paper behind it. So now I have a little notch here, and that's to let the wire pass behind that till we get to the place where we'll keep the battery pack. So I'll do that on this one as well. Alright, so one of these can be set aside. Now for one of the ones with a notch and one of the plain ones, we want to put some blue cardstock on them. We're going to just use this as kind of a finishing side to it. So when we put it on the one with the notch, have the notch going to the right. And I cut these pieces 1.5 inches by 6, and they get lined up with the long side so that 1/2 inch is coming off of either end. And I think you can see that I just put score tape on the entire back. So I'll put that cardstock on each one of those. And the second one, we want to put the cardstock on in a mirror image. So now I have the flat side going towards the right, and I'll put that cardstock on. Now I just want to trim this so that it's about, a half an inch away or so. I'll just use my scissors and kind of guesstimate that. So we can just put those two pieces to the side. Then on our final two pieces, these are the back ends, we want to install some magnets. And again, make sure you work in a mirror image. I've drawn a line that is centered going vertically, so that's at a half an inch. And then from the top, I measured from this top corner down 1.25 inches. So 1.25 inches down from the top. I'm just using my craft mat to line that up. And draw a line. That'll be the center of one magnet. And then I'll flip this around, and from the bottom I want to measure up 1 1/8. 1 1/8. So those will be the center points for 4 of our 5/8 inch magnets that you can see. I have mine set right here. So then I take my circle template and I find a circle that's bigger than 5/8 on here and line that up and draw a circle around there, so I'll have a nice placement for my magnet. And then this is just an optional step, but what I like to do is take my craft knife and go around that circle and just a little bit down in there so that I can remove one layer of this chipboard here, just to reset that magnet a little bit. Now these are very low profile magnets, so if you don't want to do that, you don't need to, but make sure you're using low profile magnets. But I just like that to be set in just a little bit. Now you don't want to get it in too far or you won't have the bearing of your magnet. So just one tiny little sliver of chipboard, or if you're concerned about will it be too much, just put the magnets on without cutting off a layer of chipboard. So I'll install the remaining magnets here and then I'll be back. My magnets are self-adhesive, but I still like to put a drop of diamond glaze or glossy accents behind them to keep them in place. And if you don't have self-adhesive discs, I find that one of those two adhesives is the best thing to put behind the magnets to keep them in place. Now we need to draw some placement guidelines on our box for these supports, and the first one we'll draw is 1.5 inches in from the back end, and take your time and get this exactly on that mark. So 1.5 inches, and then 3.5, and then the head should be coming in right at the 5-inch mark. Now, if yours comes a little bit past the 5 inches, so you can't get 5 inches in here, just whatever that is, draw it a line up. So if you only have, let's say, 4 and 7/8 or 4 and 15/16, just use that as a guideline to draw your line up. But hopefully you'll have be right at the 5-inch mark. If everything went in according to plan on the head, that's where you should be. So 1 1/2, 3 1/2, and 5, and mark that on the other side as well. So now we're ready to start installing our support pieces, and we're going to start on the side that has the wire coming out of it. And the first piece I'm going to put in is one that has cardstock on it, and it has the little notch cut out. Now the notch, we cut that before we put the cardstock on, so just take your craft knife and clear that notch of paper there. And then on the outside tabs here, take your craft knife and start about 1/16 of an inch away from the chipboard, and you'll make one cut that's parallel to each edge so that you end up with removing a little wedge so that you have this kind of action going on for each of your tabs. And then I've just got some scrap of the backing paper here that I can put on here so that these tabs don't get in my way and stick to things when I'm trying to work on the project. So I've just put those on to make sure that doesn't happen. So when we put the support strip on, we drew our line here, and we'll make sure that these have an 1/8 inch thickness, that they stay towards the inside of that line. So just run a bead of glue and make sure you hold it perpendicular there and let that set up for a moment. One more thing before you stick this down is to make sure that you get the wire coming through that channel when you put it down. Now I've just kind of folded these tabs out of the way a little bit so they won't get in the way when I'm putting this down, because we have to kind of work around this jaw circle. So I have this in place. I have it lined up on my line. The top and the bottom are aligned with the interior box. I'm just holding it in place a minute or so till that glue gets set up a little bit. So I'm ready to move to my next support piece. This one is the other one with the notch in it. Hopefully you can see that notch right there, because the battery pack is going to fit in this compartment that goes right here. So when we install this fin, the line is here. We're going to put it on the side that's closest to the one that we already installed, so that we are leaving this space. This is a 2-inch space here. We want to keep that. So I'm coming right up to that line, and I'm making sure it's staying perpendicular and that my two ends are aligned here. The next support piece that we install has nothing special about it. Just remember that the top comes to a point and the bottom is the side that has the flat part on. And this time we'll install it to the left side of the line so that we're again keeping that 2-inch space in the center. Now our last piece to get installed is one of the pieces with the magnets. Make sure your magnets are facing the outside here. Here's our top, and it's going to get installed flush with this back end here. Now you'll want to take something to make sure that this is staying nice and perpendicular there. You could take the edge of your ruler and make sure that it's in complete contact, or I usually have a little level it's just wider, just to make sure that this is all. We want this back end to stay nice and flat coming across here. So now that I have the support pieces installed on this side, I'm going to let it thoroughly dry before I move on and install them on the other side. So now the glue has set up enough on this front side so that we can turn it over and work on the support pieces for the other side. The first one is the one with blue cardstock, and I've again cut these notches at the angled sides here, and then I'll just kind of bend these out of the way, and put my wet glue on here. And install it right up to that line. Make sure you have your ends matching up with the box and that everything is perpendicular. And then next we just have two that there's nothing special about these. Remember, the pointy end goes towards the top, and we install them so that we leave this 2-inch space here. So this first one goes towards on the head side of the line, and the second one will go on the tail side of the line. So I'll go ahead and put those two pieces on. And then finally we have our last piece that has the magnets on it. The magnets face towards the outside, and we'll make sure that that stays flush and perpendicular when we put that on. And then I'm just holding my level, or you could use any kind of straight edge across this back to make sure that this last panel, especially with the magnets, is staying nice and straight across the end. And again, we'll let this side set up and dry. So our glue is all set up on our support pieces and we're ready to move on. First we're going to take a couple of measurements, and the first measurement is to see how long this is from the outside of this first support piece to the outside of the last support piece. Now if you were able to put yours in at your first one in at 5 inches, this should equal 5 inches. And then the length that's indicated in the materials and cutting guide for all of these side pieces at 5 1/8 will be correct. Now, if you had to hold your piece back a little bit so that this is a little bit short of 5 inches, then all of your side pieces that the cutting guide shows at 5 1/8, you want them to be 1/8 of an inch longer than whatever the measurement is between the outside of these two support pieces. So if this is 5, then 5 1/8. If it's a little bit less, then whatever that is, plus 1/8 of an inch, and just trim down the pieces that are listed at 5 1/8. Hopefully you've been able to get that in at 5 inches and you won't have anything to trim. Next we'll want to cover this back end, and so we'll just check our measurement here, and it should be 4 1/4, and that's what mine is. So that's what you want, is 4 1/4, and this we know is 5 inches tall. So we're going to cut a piece of cardstock that is 4 1/4 by 6 inches. 4 1/4 by 6 inches. So this is my piece of cardstock that is 4 1/4 by 6 inches. I want to cut out a central rectangle here. So I'm going to measure in 1 5/8 inch from each side. So 1 5/8 inches on each side. And then from the top and the bottom, measure in 1 inch. So 1 inch on the top and the bottom. And then cut out that rectangle. Now I have my hole cut in my cardstock, and I've done some prep with score tape. I ran a 1/2 inch on the top and bottom, and then I put 1/2 inch tape around the opening here. And then on the end itself, I ran 1/8 inch tape along the outside, and here's some 1/4 inch tape around the edges here, and then I just filled in with a little 1/2 inch tape there. And also I think you can notice I found this I was using this before. This little box is just the perfect size to support the head in here, so I'm not damaging it, and I have a nice sturdy surface that I can work on to put this end on. So when we put it on, it fits exactly side to side, but we should have a 1/2 inch. If I hold it over here, you'll be able to see there's a 1/2 inch. Get it in the camera here. 1/2 inch overlap on the top and the bottom. So that's how it's going to go on, and we'll just stick it on flat to begin with. And so I'll remove all the score tape backing, and I'll also take my fine line glue here and run a bead of glue around the edges of these magnets just to give it a little extra stability. So I'll remove all my score tape backing, put the glue on, and take the backing off of here and put this on like this, and then I'll be back. So to put the paper on, I've left one piece of the backing on so I can judge the 1/2 inch overhang, and I have the glue around my magnets, and so I can just do it this way to get it centered and put on. Then I flipped it over and put it back in my box so that I can get everything burnished down around the magnets and on this front side. Then I'll take it back out of my box and flip it over. And what I'm going to do is cut straight up to this corner and then cut the corner even with the chipboard. So I'll do that and then I'll show you what I mean, because it's a little hard to see. So here's how I cut it, even with this edge and the little 1/2 inch there. So basically we're left with a 1/2 inch tab that's the same width as the box here. And that's the same thing on the top. The 1/2 inch tab is the width of the box, and then we can just go ahead and put that down on both sides, and of course we'll come back and burnish everything when we're finished. Then we can put this back in our box. And here, to finish off this inside, we'll take our craft knife and then go diagonally to these corners, and if you've burnished here, you'll be able to see where those corners are and where to take your craft knife to. And so I'll do that. And once you've made those slits, you can take your bone folder around those edges to make sure you're going to get a nice sharp edge, and then go ahead and fold those tabs to the inside. And then make sure you give everything a nice burnish. Now we're ready to start work on the bottom piece for the body, and I've started out by cutting a piece of my peacock blue cardstock that is 3 1/4 inches long, which is the width of the bottom here. And then I put it on my scoreboard and scored it at a 1/2 inch down the middle, and then I've added 3/8 inch score tape to either side. And what I want to do with this piece is to wrap one end of the bottom here. So I'll just put that score even with the end, attach that, and then wrap it around to the other side. So I have the end wrapped and burnished, and now what I want to do is to draw some placement lines so that we'll be able to get this centered on the bottom of the interior box. And because this piece is 3 1/4 inches wide and our box is 2 1/4 inches wide, I'll draw a line 1/2 inch in on each side. And now I'll be able to center that on the bottom of our interior box. Now we also need to measure and then punch some holes for our pulley wheels, and we're going to measure down 1/2 inch from each end, and on this end we can just use the blue paper because it's 1/2 inch here, and then on the other side we'll come down 1/2 inch. And then we'll measure in 5/16 of an inch. That's a 1/16 of an inch more than 1/4 of an inch. And now we have the holes marked that we can punch with the smaller end of our crocodile that we will use for the pulley wheels. So I'll go ahead and get those holes punched. Next, I cut a piece of decorative paper that is 5 1/8 inches long, the length of my chipboard, plus 3/4 inch on the width. So this was 3 1/4, so now this is 4 inches. So 4 inches by the length of my chipboard. And I'm just going to temporarily attach it, center it and attach it to my bottom piece here, and then I'll repunch those holes so that the holes go through the paper. Now we'll remove the chipboard, and I'm going to make a mark here so that I know which end goes towards the front, which is the end with the blue on here. Now we're ready to glue our bottom piece in place, and we'll use our placement lines here. It hangs off of this end, the open end down here, by 1/8 of an inch, so it gets lined up right behind the paper tabs here at the end of the chipboard next to the head. So that's where it's going to go, and you'll just want to flip it over and so that you can see your placement lines on the left and right to make sure you get it centered on the bottom. So just use some wet glue and get that in place, put some pressure on it, and let it thoroughly dry. So now that the glue on the bottom is dried, we can fold in these 2 tabs. These come from the piece of cardstock that we put on this first support that was nearest the head. And then we can install our piece of decorative paper that goes here that we measured for the bottom of the box. And what I did here was I put a piece of 3/8 inch score tape running the length of both sides, because those will be tabs that will come up here on the edge. And then I made sure I had good score tape coverage in the center, because there'll be a bottom fin that comes on here that we'll want to make sure our paper is well attached to the chipboard so that that fin stays anchored in place. And when we put this on, well, it's going to line up with this edge here, and you can use the 3/8 inch score tape as a guide for these edges here. And then make sure your holes are lining up. So I'll go ahead and get that piece attached. And then once we have that decorative paper attached, we can go ahead and put screws down through these holes here and attach the 4 pulley wheels. So here are the 4 wheels installed, and when you put it down on the wheels, don't be alarmed that it wants to tip forward at this point. That's to be expected.